Alright guys, so I'm going to quickly take you through the process of sculpting a head, starting with a polysphere. And I'm going to kind of breeze through this quickly so that we can keep this video nice and short. I just want to show you the processes involved in creating the sphere, generating the primary forms of the head, and some of the features, and then using Dynamesh and maybe even appending eyeballs to the head. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is go into Lightbox down here. If you don't see it, you can click the Lightbox button or use the comma key on your keyboard. And then go under Tool, double click Polysphere. You can see that now I've got Polysphere there in my tool palette. Let's go ahead and drag that out onto the canvas. I'm going to switch off of the annoying red wax material, basic material 2. First thing I'm going to do is turn on symmetry. Okay. And now, just so I know where I'm at tumbling, I'm just going to plant a little mark there on it so I can see, and then switch to the side view. I'll take my trim dynamic brush, and I'm just going to create kind of a little plane on the side of the what's going to be the cranium here. Okay, so now we're starting to think about this thing in terms of the masses of the head, and we're creating the side plane of the head of the cranium. Okay. Next, what I want to do is pull out the facial mass. So I'm going to choose, I could either take the move brush, which will give me a decent result. I might even take the move elastic for something like this. And you can try both, but you can see that the move elastic has a sort of a different influence. And I would encourage you to kind of play around with that and see which one you like and which one you don't. Okay, pull out the chin a little bit more. I'm going to think about squaring off the bottom of the jaw. So I'll take my trim dynamic and hold the Alt key here. Planing off the front of the face a little bit. Thinking about the jaw going back. Okay. Now I'm going to create a plane for the forehead. This trim dynamic brush is really excellent for this. Plane for the top front of the cranium, top back of the cranium, moving backwards towards the base of the skull, right there. Let's see here. Okay. Before we move forward, I'm going to get rid of the spherical top profile and take my move brush. Make sure that we've got a little bit of a taper inward from back to front. Okay, so we want the head to taper inward a little bit, just like it is here. Okay, now what we need to do is pull out a neck on this. So the way I like to do this is by masking off a region on the bottom of the sphere, what's starting to become our skull. Okay, something easy like that, and then click on the negative space to invert your mask. And then you can take the Transpose tool with using the W key and drag your action line straight down holding Shift, and then click and hold Shift to pull the neck straight down till we get some sort of a cylindrical volume for the neck. Okay, and I might kind of tilt it back just a little bit as well. Now I'll clear that. Now you can see that since we're working with a poly mesh, if I turn on frame here, you can see the polygons are starting to get really stretched. So we could subdivide this another time, but now if we go in here and start sculpting on it, you can still see that we're getting some artifacting. So rather than subdividing this a whole bunch of time, what I'm going to do is Dynamesh this, which will essentially re-topologize this with even topology all across the surface. So the way that you do that is you go under your tool palette, click on Geometry, open up Dynamesh, and then click this Dynamesh button right here. Now if you don't delete your subdivision levels first, you'll get a message that says this mesh has multiple subdivision levels. Would you like to freeze first? You can hit yes, and you'll get something that looks like that. Generally, what I do is, if I forget to do that, I hit yes, I undo the action so that I'm back to where I started with my subdivision levels, and then I delete my lower subdivision levels. Okay, so then now that I've got, now I'm basically at level 4, so delete lower, and then I click Dynamesh, and that gives me a little bit nicer of a result. Okay, so now you can see that we've got even topology across the surface for us to sculpt on. Okay, so let's move on from here. I'm going to take the Trim Dynamic brush and just start to clean up this neck a little bit. I really want to feel like this is more of a cylinder. Okay. Bring that brow down a little bit. Okay. About halfway between the jaw and the top of the head is going to be our eyeball. So I'm going to draw out my action line with the Transpose tool and just kind of keep an eye on that spot right there as I switch to my damn standard brush and just sort of mark that in there. Okay, so I draw my eye line through there. Just above the eye line is going to be the brow line, obviously. Okay, so we've got it this far. What I want to do now is take my clay buildup brush, and I'm going to use the default version with this alpha here because it does a really good job at cutting through the geometry. So, and I'm going to take that brush and just kind of carve out this whole region under the eyes. Now the reason for this is because we want this face to have draft going backwards, right? We want it to kind of fall an angle backwards like that, as opposed to being really flat. And so one way I can ensure that we get this, or that I get this draft, is by carving out this region to start and then building it up as we go along. Okay, so I'll carve it out, and it gives us a real sense of depth to the face. Okay, smooth that back a little bit. I should really keep moving because I wanted to keep this kind of short. I'm going to pull the brow out just a little bit and then start to sculpt in the eye socket, right? The cheekbone, and then the zygomatic bone going back right into the ear. Okay, so if we start to think about where our ear is, maybe somewhere about there. I treat the ear similarly to the neck in that I mask it off, and then take the Transpose tool and you can rotate it out just like that, or you can also use the move brush and pull it out, holding Alt to pull along the normals of the underlying surface. Okay. Okay, now I want to think about my jaw line, starting down here at the square part of the jaw, and back up towards the ear. So we've got a couple angles here. First one going back slightly upward, and then once you reach the square part of the jaw there, it starts to angle up and back. And you'll notice that the ear follows this jaw angle. Okay, so those fall along the same line. Oops. Okay, what I want to do now is establish the front and side planes of the face. So from the brow region here, just outside of where the eyeball is going to sit, we'll draw a line down towards the mouth, which is going to mark the front plane of our face. And I'm just going to fill that in a little bit here. I think we need a little bit more presence of our eye socket. Okay, and I'll fill in the side plane a little bit as well. You'll notice that my resolution's pretty low. That's it's on purpose because I don't really need a whole lot more resolution at this point, so I'm not going to add it until I feel like I need it. Okay, so again, I'm using the Trim Dynamic brush here and switching between holding Alt and not holding Alt to add and then subtract from the form. Okay. Another mark we want to be thinking about is the superciliary arch, right, or the brow region. Okay, so if I get my damn standard brush back here, we've got the brow region here. We want to make sure that that has a clearly defined point out here on the outside of the brow, which is going to go right back into the temporal ridge. Okay, so mine is sitting a little bit high right now, so I'm just going to mark that with the clay buildup brush, and then grab my Trim Dynamic brush and make all that stuff make sense. I'll take a second to kind of refine some of this stuff up here, just super quick so we can keep moving. Okay, so we've got our temporal ridge, we've got our frontal bone here, which creates sort of a mass on the front of the cranium. I'm feeling like we need to refine this brow region a little bit more. Okay, so maybe adding a nose is going to help a little bit here. So why don't we go ahead and do that. I'll take my clay buildup brush again. By the way, in order to get the clay buildup brush, I'm hitting the B key to bring up my brush menu, then the C key to isolate to brushes that start with the letter C, like clay, and then the B key for clay buildup. Okay, really quick way of getting that brush in your hand. Okay, so the nose is going to split the difference basically between the brow and the chin. So if we think about where the brow is down to the chin and go halfway, the nose is going to come down to about there. Now we can rework the proportions as we go along. Not too concerned about that right now, but it is good and going to make your life a lot easier if you just kind of start with building based on correct proportions. Always thinking about what the skull is doing underneath. Okay, so we don't want to forget that there's bone under here, bone and cartilage, and then we're just building on top of that. Grabbing my trim dynamic brush to plane this off a little bit more. What we want to feel with the mouth is sort of a horseshoe shape, okay, so that the teeth and the lips sit on sort of a rounded cylindrical shape as opposed to being flat. We don't want a flat mouth. Okay, so that's also another reason for creating that big scoop out of the face to start. Okay, and we can take our damn standard brush, right, and find about where the mouth is going to be by going from the bottom of the nose to the chin and dividing that into thirds. So 1/3 down from the bottom of the nose to the chin is where the mouth is going to sit, the mouth line rather. Okay, so I'm going to bring these cheekbones in a little bit. Continue to define this plane here. We can go back in and soften some of this stuff up. So we're not trying to detail just yet. I want to make sure that this eye socket has a C-shaped curve if you look at the outside edge from a 3/4, or from a profile rather, it just curves back like that. Okay, so at this point I'm starting to run out of resolution. I don't quite have enough resolution for the mouth. And I certainly don't have enough for the back of the ears, so I'm going to need to Redynamesh this thing. Before I do that, actually, I'm going to pull out a little bit of the shoulder region. So I'll take the Move Elastic brush again, or maybe even the snake hook brush would be good for this. Okay, and just going to stretch that out there, thinking about where is my trapezius muscle, all the way down to the clavicles. Pull out sort of a little bust on this guy. Okay, just something like that. Thinking about the angle of the scapula coming forward. this in just a little bit before we Dynamesh. Oh, don't want to do that. In order to avoid that, of course, you can turn off backface masking. Also, you will find that under Brush, Auto Masking, and Backface Masking right there. I have created a custom interface which has backface masking right out in front because I use it frequently, as you can see. Okay, so in order to re-Dynamesh this, all we have to do is, with no mask painted, Control, click, and drag in the negative space. Now you can see it jump real quick. If I undo and redo, undo and redo. Now if I do that with the wireframe turned down, undo, redo, undo, redo, you can see that re-Dynameshes and distributes the polygons. Now it's not going to create more geometry because we've set the resolution. Here it's going to keep it pretty, actually I'm not sure exactly about that, if it creates more polygons or not, but it keeps a relative resolution in the places that we've already got sculpted. So if we need more resolution, which I was just saying we do, then what we're going to have to do is turn the resolution up and then Dynamesh. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you undo first or not. I'm going to undo and then turn my resolution up to say 256, so I'll double it. Then Dynamesh. Now you can see that we've got some more resolution to work with here. Okay, so I'll turn this wireframe off. I'm going to take a quick look at oops, how my proportions are looking. Okay, so we've got sort of a long-faced gentleman here. I'm going to bring that down a little bit. Bring the front, the cranium down a little bit. Okay, generally the back of the skull lines up with the bottom of the ear and with the nose. So the nose and the ear are lining up, so why don't we just bring the skull down a little bit. Okay, the neck is going to have a slight taper inwards from top to bottom, and then taper outwards at the bottom as the trapezius flares out. Okay, of course we've got our sternocleidomastoid, which comes down from the base of the skull there, essentially on the side, down to the pit of the neck. Okay. Our hyoid bone in here, and then the cartilage which forms our Adam's apple. Start to redefine the jaw a little bit here. And then thinking about where our clavicles are going to be. Sternum. Second head of the sternomastoid. Okay, let's take a look at the mouth now. With the standard brush, I'm going to define the top, which creates sort of an M shape. Okay, so the top edge of the upper lip will create this M shape. And then we've got a bump right in the middle. the philtrum just above that, which is the little dent beneath the nose. Okay. And then for the lower lip, we want a little bit flatter across the bottom, so less of an arch on the lower lid. And we also want to pull it back just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to mask off the upper lid, pull the lower lid back just a touch, so that we've got a nice angle going from the upper lip to the lower lid. Okay. And then underneath it, we've got sort of a W shape. Which is going to define the top of the chin. Let's take a look at our nose. Okay, at the root of the nose here, the root of the nose is going to be pretty much in line with our upper eyelid, which we still need to put in there. And then we've got one mass right here, sort of the upper mass. But you'll notice that its primary form is sort of this wedge shape, right? And we want to maintain that. We've got the wing of the nose, the nostril, the outside of the nostril, the nostrils, of course. Okay, and then we've got the ball of the nose right here. And if I define these planes a little bit more clearly, which might be kind of difficult with this resolution, you're going to see a plane kind of tilting outward like that, which starts to define the lower outer region of the ball of the nose. And then something, a little plane on the front there. And this is obviously a specific kind of nose. It's sort of a classical nose. Okay, and we've got this triangular glabella right here. Brow ridge needs to come down a little bit. So just above the root of the nose, we have our glabella there. Okay, now let's start thinking about these eyes. What I want to do first is pull down the upper lid. Okay, so I'm going to sculpt in the upper lid just with my clay buildup brush. Just pull that down. Not too worried about there being a cavity back there. We're just going to stick a sphere in there for the eyeball. And I could even take my move brush, pull that down a little bit. Okay, we want it to be slightly lower on the inside than on the outside. I'm going to need to Redynamesh here in a second. Okay, you'll notice that that eye is sitting back behind the brow ridge, which is what we're looking for. Okay, and just above the eyelid, we've got the fleshy fold that comes down and covers the eyelid. Okay, so I'll sculpt that in there. We want it to be concave on the inside here, and then as you travel out towards the outside of the lid, it becomes convex. This form is going to travel underneath the eyeball there. Excuse me, underneath the brow ridge. Starting to fight the resolution again, so at some point here I'm going to want to Dynamesh, making sure we don't lose the corner of the brow there, going back into our temporal ridge. Okay, at this point we can probably go ahead and append some eyeballs in here, so why don't we do that. Again, I'm going to go into Lightbox, generate a polysphere, switch back to my head, and then go under Subtool, click Append, and then select my polysphere. Now you can see by default I still have the head selected, so I want to select the polysphere. Draw an action line without symmetry turned on. Switch to scale by hitting the E key, and then scale this eyeball down. Then move it into place. I'm going to move it to the right side of the head first. Oops. I want to scale this down, so select your scale tool. Eyeball should be about 1 inch in diameter. Move that back into place. And if you draw a line from your brow, your superciliary arch, down to your cheekbone, the eyeball is going to sit right on that line. Okay, so that's how you can help, or that can help you sort of place the eyeball. Okay, so that looks pretty good. From here, I want to mirror this eyeball so that we have it on both sides. The way you can do that is modify topology. So we're going to be in the tool palette and then go under geometry and select modify topology and click mirror and weld. And before we do that, we have to delete our subdivision levels. And now you can see that we've got two eyeballs as a part of the same subtool. Okay, so a nice way of generating eyes pretty quickly. Alright, now if I alt click on my head mesh, we can go back to sculpting our head. Okay, so now I want to start to think about pulling out a lower lid. One thing that might help you when you're sculpting around another subtool like this, because as I sculpt this, if I isolate just the head, you can see that a large portion of the head geometry is not being affected, which may be okay, but you may want to sculpt something that looks a little bit more like that so that it's maybe easier to work with and less stretching of polygons. So if I go ahead and turn solo back off so we see all our visible subtools and turn on transparency, we can now sculpt through the object while still seeing it in context. Okay, so this is often how I will sculpt eyelids using transparency. Okay, sculpt that inner eyelid area where the caruncula is going to go. Need to fill in above our cheekbone. Really pushing this geometry as far as I can. Okay, I'm going to turn off transparency to see how we're doing. So obviously we need to sort of work the proportions and refine this area some more. But that, for all intents and purposes, is how you would add eyeballs and then start sculpting your lids. Okay, let's quickly finish this up. At this point, I'm going to Dynamesh again to see if I can get some better resolution out of this. Yep. Okay, maybe I'll take the standard brush just to sort of define these lids a little bit better. Okay, lower lid. Just adjusting the shape of the eye. If we look at it from a profile, again, we want the upper lid to be sitting out in front of the lower lid. Sort of like the mouth, where the upper lip sits out in front of the lower lip. Okay, so let's kind of quickly address just a little bit of the ear and then call it a carve-in helix. Standard brush to add a little volume. And I really want to carve this area behind the ear out. So I'll go ahead and push that in. And here, since we're going to be stretching the polygons quite a bit, we're going to want to Redynamesh. Once we're done, Let's see. Before we wrap this up, I'll just start to build out the neck a little bit more with the trapezius. Okay, 7th cervical vertebrae. If we want to start refining this, we can always take our H-polish brush, which is great for either planing surfaces or refining surfaces, depending on what you're trying to do. Just checking some of my proportions. Generally, we want to see the jaw from the back view. So this character's got kind of a slender jaw at the moment, which is fine. I think that's where we're going to call it quits for today. That gives you all the tools to start playing around with heads of your own, of different shapes and sizes, and using Dynamesh and appending eyeballs and pulling out ears and all of that. So I think that's that. And in the next video we will probably start to refine the forms, check our proportions, and make this thing look a little bit more natural. Okay, thanks.